Welcome to the Alex Salmond Show, where we examine the political impact of the latest astounding developments in the presidential campaign. In US political wisdom, the October surprise is an unexpected news event which dictates the outcome of the upcoming presidential election, either changing its course or reinforcing the apparently inevitable. This October, President Trump, a long-time sceptic of the virulence of the COVID-19 pandemic, just 1 week ago became a victim himself and was dramatically helicoptered from the White House to Walter Reed National Military Medical Center in Bethesda, Maryland. Since then, we have had regular and often confusing medical briefings, tweets and video messages from the ailing and then recovered president, including a bizarre car cavalcade to greet well-wishers. By Monday night, he announced on Twitter that he was effectively discharging himself from hospital and moving back to the White House, feeling better than he has felt for 20 years, as well as claiming the credit for new COVID treatments. However, beyond the entirely human reaction of wishing anyone afflicted well, the question now is, how will this October surprise impact on the presidential campaign? Will it have hindered the president, or might it just have helped him? Back in July, we interviewed two top Republican strategists on the trouble in the Trump campaign. They warned us not to write the president off. Today, we turn to the Democrats. How did they handle the new difficulties of campaigning against a president struck down by COVID? We interviewed two top academic commentators, Professor Joe White from Case Western University, Cleveland, and from the nation's capital of Washington, D.C., Professor Keneshia Grant. But first, to Alex with your tweets, emails and messages in response to last week's show.
Now, lots of comments in on last week's show, which featured Peter Oborne and Professor Richard Murphy commenting on the political problems of Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister. Many says, excellent programme, but listening to the predictions of these two excellent guests for events over the next year, it's one miserable prospect. And John says, first time I've watched the programme. Welcome aboard, John. I enjoyed it. Peter Oborne and Richard Murphy were both excellent. And Alan says, Sunak, referring to the Chancellor of the Exchequer, his poster boy status is on borrowed time. Fiona says, Scotland and Wales will definitely want independence from England before long. Martin McPhee says, Professor Murphy predicted 5 million unemployed. Wow. I mean, wow. Now, Jim Wallace says, if that vote ever does happen in my lifetime, referring to an independence vote, I will go back to Scotland, vote no, and then go back to England. I paid many thousands in Scottish taxes in my lifetime, so I have every right to vote. Now, Jim, in the last Scottish referendum in 2014, which I organised, it was a residential vote. You had to stay in Scotland, wherever you were from, to be entitled to vote. What it'll be like next time round, if indeed there is a next time round, we'll just have to wait and see. And Mohammed from Bangladesh says, awesome presentation and discussions. While Jean says, glad to see you back. Good analysis of where things stand for the Tory party. I'll keep all the points to hand to see the end result, as will we all, Jean. And now back to Tasmina.
When Prime Minister Boris Johnson was rushed to hospital in London, Britain held its breath, and the Prime Minister's popularity soared. It took months for the halo effect to wear off. Could the same thing now happen to President Trump? Or will his succumbing to the virus reinforce the accusation that he and his entourage have not taken it seriously enough, until, of course, they found it knocking at the door of the White House? And will ordinary Americans wonder why they don't have access to the experimental drugs which seem to work the presidential oracle in double quick time? Attention has also been focused on the event at the White House Rose Garden to recognise Supreme Court nominee Amy Coney Barrett. Numerous people who attended this event have already tested positive, an event where social distancing seemed very far from the norm. So will the president gain a sympathy vote or lose support from those who think he brought COVID upon himself? Will he be admired for his rapid recovery or resented for his privileged access to treatment? Alex is joined by Professor Joe White of Cape Western Reserve University, Cleveland.
Joe, welcome to the Alex Salmond Show.
It's a pleasure to meet you.
Now, this whole business of the president helicoptered into hospital, helicopter out again, announcing that he has defeated COVID, how is this going to play out in in this remarkable presidential campaign?
It won't make much of a difference. I think that part of it is that so many other things have been going on, such as his debate performance. Part of it is that so many people have already made their decisions about whether they like Trump or dislike Trump. I think it slightly hurts him probably in that he will look a bit more like a fool and a hypocrite, particularly when he says it's not such a big deal after having probably hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of free health care from the federal government. It'll be fairly easy for the Democrats to shoot back at that, saying, it's not such a big deal if you have insurance and you have a whole government at your command. But meanwhile, the Republicans are trying to take away people's insurance, and it's a lot bigger deal for those people. So I don't think it'll make much of a difference. On balance, it probably hurts him just a little.
But couldn't the president argue, well, listen, a week ago I was generally recognised, not by himself, of course, but by lots of people as a loser in the debate. Now I'm acknowledging myself as a winner over COVID-19. Hasn't he dominated the political agenda?
I don't think, he will certainly make the argument that this shows it's not such a big deal, and therefore it's a government and Democrats' plot that has caused us to shut down the best economy in history, and his survival shows that it's not such a big deal. But, he had one of the guests at his Oklahoma rally died, Herman Cain, a former Republican presidential candidate. Again, he got medical care that's not available to virtually anybody, given the special drugs he got. So it's not going to be a really compelling argument. He'll make it, absolutely. But I don't think it's going to convince anybody who wasn't already convinced by him.
Now, many Americans may well say, I would love to get this experimental drug cocktail that so miraculously treated the president. But equally, a lot of people will say, well, it shows that President Trump, whatever you might say about him, is a fighter, he's a strong man, he's demonstrated that he can recover from anything. Isn't that an argument that might carry some sway, at least with his own base?
Well, first of all, we have to remember that we don't know what is going to happen over the next week with President Trump. Like many medical conditions, people get better and then they get worse. I know somebody who has a colleague whose father was getting better one day and died the next with COVID. So we have to remember that we do not know how the health story is going to play out. This weekend could be a very different look than right now. He's been trying to play down the virus all along, and he will make that argument, but I don't think it's going to change anybody's mind. I think his supporters will buy it, and the people who don't like him will not buy it.
Now, one of the consequences of the president being dramatically helicoptered into hospital was that the Democrat campaign decided to withdraw the attack ads. These are the negative advertising, principally on television, which dominate American election campaigns. Doesn't that show a bit of uncertainty in the Democrat camp as how to deal with an ailing president that can't kick an opponent when he's down, that sort of thing?
Yeah, it's sort of it's hard to be sure that the Republicans would have done the same thing. But remember, there's a lot of other ads going on. I don't think the Lincoln Project pulled its ads. The Republicans who really dislike Trump and have been running very strong ads against him, I don't think they've pulled their ads. It's just for a short period of time. It gives the Democrats are running some positive ads. What the heck? Why not do that for a little while? I do not think it's a big deal. It's very hard to think that the ads are going to make much of a difference one way or the other. Again, with how polarized people are right now, I have no doubt that Joe Biden is going to have more people trying to vote for him than Donald Trump is. Whether that turns out to Biden winning the election is an entirely different story.
How do you rate the chances of the president saying, no, I'm not accepting that, I'm going to court, I'm going to challenge the state results, I'm going to challenge it right to the Supreme Court, and I'm going to fling the election into the House? Is that a serious prospect the Democrats are now looking at, or was Joe Biden right to kind of sweep it aside in the presidential debate?
Well, I think what he was doing in the debate was he was saying this isn't a serious thing in order to make it look silly. Do Democrats think Trump is going to do that? Absolutely, and not just Democrats. I think that a great many commentators and observers of American politics find it very hard to believe that Trump would accept vote counts that say he lost.
So when we look back, let's just assume that the opinion polls in America are correct and that Joe Biden is heading for victory. And let's assume that that is reflected in the Electoral College and overcomes all the problems. If we look back on the presidency of Donald Trump, wouldn't he at least be able to say that he innovated in terms of how he communicated with the American electorate? I mean, he has governed by tweet, has he not?
Yeah, it's sort of I tweet, therefore I am. He seems to see himself. It validates himself to see himself, on social media. I think that Trump has shown a couple of things about the presidency. One thing is that when you teach about the presidency, I teach a presidency course, you usually talk about things like the formal powers of the presidency and the informal powers of the presidency and how presidents get elected and the ways that presidents can shape policy or cannot shape policy. But Trump has definitely set a standard for both how to talk about your opponents, bypassing the normal media, although of course he has a huge megaphone in Fox News, but bypassing the normal media, relating to people directly through social media, but really sort of establishing the tone of politics, how people think about politics, shaping how people think about each other. That was going on anyway. This country has been polarizing for a long time, but presidents can try to work against it or they can try to work for it. And one of the most memorable aspects of Trump's presidency, and an aspect that Biden is running against, is the way that Trump has helped define the polity, define what our political life is supposed to be like through the attention that a president gets.
So, Joe, I want you to take your many professorial hats off for a second and wheel in your crystal ball and tell our audience what's going to happen over the next few weeks. Who's going to win?
I don't know who's going to win. I know who's going to have more people trying to vote for him, but I do not know how that will play out. All of the things that can go wrong favor Trump in terms of the popular vote. All the obstacles to voting are bigger obstacles to Democrats than to Republicans. The Electoral College clearly favors Republicans. 538, Nate Silver's analysis website says, if Biden wins by 3% of the popular vote, then he's favored to win the election. But if he wins by 2, he isn't. So I really do not know what will happen. If I had to guess, I would say that by middle of November, it will look like Biden won the election, and then Trump and the Republicans will do everything they can to overturn that.
So come next January, who's going to be sitting behind the desk in the Oval Office?
Boy, that's really hard to say, because even if you say it ends up being Nancy Pelosi by the law, that law will be challenged. Again, if I have to guess, Joe Biden, but that's with relatively low confidence, 55%.
In which case, Joe, will be back to interview you in February to ask you what happened. Thank you so much for joining me on the Alex Salmond Show.
My pleasure.
And join us after the break, where I interview Professor Keneshia Grant of Howard University in the nation's capital of Washington, D.C. Join us then.
Welcome back. Just over a week ago, the Democrats would be feeling pretty confident. On most assessments, Vice President Joe Biden emerged ahead on points after that first towsy presidential debate. They are feeling equally confident that their feisty vice presidential candidate, Senator Kamala Harris, saw off the rather nondescript incumbent Mike Pence in the second debate. Now all calculations are up in the air. Alex asked Professor Keneshia Grant how the Democrats will handle these unprecedented circumstances.
Welcome to the Alex Salmond Show, Professor Grant.
Thank you for having me.
Now, from a political point of view, how is the dramatic events of the last week with the president rushed to hospital and then declaring himself well and helicoptering himself back to the White House, how is that going to play out with the American electorate?
I think we already see it playing out a bit with some of the polling numbers changing. It's been the case that Joe Biden has received a bit of a jump in the polling support from Americans as a result of the president's hospitalization. And I think that has to do both with kind of the idea that folks want a leader who is well, but also with the idea that individuals are not feeling good about Donald Trump's having gotten COVID and not feeling good about maybe some things they think he could have done to prevent getting COVID in this instance.
But hasn't the president got an argument? Now, a week ago, I mean, he was well recognised as the loser in a presidential debate with Joe Biden. Now he's declared himself the winner over COVID-19. Is that not a powerful message?
I think it might be for some people, and I think that we are living in a polarized time in the United States. And so the people who support Donald Trump support him fiercely. The people who support Joe Biden support him fiercely. And so I think that certainly a part of the point of leaving the hospital and going onto the balcony to have a talk with the American public is to demonstrate strength. But I also think that this has the potential to backfire. Hopefully the president remains well, but if he doesn't, then that will be a problem for him. I think the other thing with this that creates a bit of a problem is that Americans know that he has different levels of access to care than they have. And so it does demonstrate that he is a winner, but I think people still have questions, or demonstrate for the moment that he is a winner. But I think people still have questions about whether he will be a winner over COVID in the long run and whether their lives will be feeling like winning lives following this election.
Now, from the perspective of the Democrats now, I mean, they're ahead in the polls, they're within touching distance of an election victory. Will there be a tendency over these next few weeks for Vice President Biden to sit on that lead, try not to make mistakes, or will they be pushing hard for a convincing victory?
I think they'll be pushing hard. What pushing hard looks like is different from the Democrats than what it is for the Republicans. And so I think for them, pushing hard means having the vice president maintain kind of a calm, not be so public facing in his events, in part because of COVID, but also in part because he has been in the past criticized for some missteps and some misspeaking. I think that we should expect to see Kamala Harris be activated and out and about more publicly in the near future. And so I think that, yes, they will be pushing to get more support, to just ensure that they win. But again, I think what that looks like would be different for them than it would be for the Republicans, who I might expect will have the president front and center of their push.
Now, you mentioned Senator Harris, the vice presidential candidate for the Democrats. We saw the debate in the early hours of this morning. How an important figure will she be in the last few weeks of this campaign?
I think she's an extremely important figure, critically important. I think that the debate performance was important. I think that the continuing questioning that we'll see her conduct with the Supreme Court will be important. I think she is an important surrogate because she can talk, she can do so fiercely, she does so well. And I think they'll dispatch her to talk not only to the American electorate broadly, but also to people in various groups like Black voters and women voters and other kinds of individuals who the Democrats would like to see have a final push in the days leading up to the election.
Now, can I ask you, Professor Grant, you as a distinguished academic at a leading university in America, but a young Black woman, how do you relate, thinking about this divided society, to the sort of slightly older, white American, hard-edged supporters of Donald Trump? Isn't that a most massive divide in American society, almost two different countries?
I think it is, but I think the reason that it's a massive divide is not to do with me or people like me. I think that Black women, myself in particular, and other people who I know like me, understand that we have lots in common with the people who support Donald Trump. I think that much of what we face, many of the problems that we face, are problems that are faced by Americans in general, but that there are some Americans, the Americans like the ones you name, who don't recognize these problems as problems that go across the color line. They, I think that the problem of race is the most important problem in the nation. And I don't think that they see places for us to work together where I think people like me believe that we'd be better served if we all work together against these common problems we have.
And thinking about the president and his many pronouncements and his even more tweets, is there anything at all about the Donald that you can relate to in terms of anything he says about any subject? I mean, it could be said that he alone among recent presidents, he hasn't involved America in any more overseas adventures, for example.
The short answer is no. I don't. There's so much wrong about the current state of the world that I can't remember or think about anything that is right about it. I think to the point that you're asking about this idea that America should be at home, that our troops should be at home, I think that has its place. And so I, don't study foreign affairs and would not comment tremendously on that. But I think the vast majority of the things I experience in my life and that my family experiences has been negative during the Trump administration. And so, to be frank, I don't think that there's much that I can celebrate about his presidency.
Now, of course, the Democratic Party, after being beaten unexpectedly 4 years ago, are thirsting for a victory. But can you see Senator Biden as anything more than a transitional figure? He's not likely, as we'd say in Scotland, to set the heather on fire, is he?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think that you're right that he is probably a transitional figure. And I think he knows that. I think the Democrats have made their peace with that. I think that a part of the reason that we had such an intense debate about the vice president and who would be vice president was because everybody understood that the person named vice president would have a setup to be the president in the next election. And so I think that Joe Biden understands that he will likely not be changing the Democratic Party tremendously, that he will be a bit of a stabilizer for the nation. And I think most Democrats and Joe Biden as a candidate are fine with that.
So would your hopes be on that we might, all being well for the Democrats in the election, be looking in 4 years' time at President Kamala Harris?
I think that would be lovely. But I think that I have learned over the past 4 years to kind of monitor and manage my expectations. And so for now, I just want a good, clean election with a smooth transition of power and a good, clean and calm 4 years. And then we can deal with what we get after that. But certainly I'd be thrilled to see a Black woman as president of the United States.
How do you rate the suggestion that's being made, and certainly one which hasn't been outright denied by the president, that there might be a chance that he'll not accept an election defeat, would sit in the White House, would take it to the Supreme Court, would challenge various state results? Is that a real expectation among Democrats, that the president is not going to evacuate the Oval Office under any circumstances?
For sure, I think Democrats are worried about this peaceful transition of power. I think Republicans are worried about it too. I think only the folks who are the most diehard Trump supporters, who support Trump over the notion of our democracy, are fine with his comments about fighting this on multiple levels, even if it seems to be legitimate. I think everybody else is worried about the prospect of him staying when we all believe that someone else won the election.
And one final thought, Professor Grant. Many people watching this around the world, for all the criticisms there have been of the United States, which have been many, have still regarded the United States as the shining city on the hill, to use the quotation. What could you say to those people who've so admired America but have had perhaps substantial doubts about the integrity of the American system, indeed American society, over these last few years?
I think I would say to them to have faith in the American people. There is still a very large population of Americans who have their heads on straight, who understand what it means to be a shining city on the hill, who believe in this democracy, and who are willing to work for it. And so I think that this election will be kind of a turning point where we get to see who controls power. I think many of the people who are the folks who I'm talking about, who want the best for the nation, did not believe that the worst was possible, did not believe that elections matter. They didn't believe that the world could change significantly or that our nation could change significantly based on who was elected president. And so I think everybody has been disavowed of those beliefs now. I think we all understand how important the American presidency is. And I think that everybody who can will be doing their best to have their voices heard during this election, because now we understand how important it is.
Professor Grant from Howard University in the nation's capital, thank you so much for joining me on the Alex Salmond Show.
Thank you for having me.
Only 1 week ago, with the president rushed to hospital, American political historians were busy researching the name of Horace Greeley. This towering figure of 19th century journalism and co-founder of the Republican Party found himself campaigning as a presidential candidate against official Republican incumbent Ulysses S. Grant. His health failed during the campaign and he died before the Electoral College met. Now, 1 week later, the same political commentators are researching Lazarus. President Trump's dramatic recovery means that his health problems may end up posing more political questions for the Democrats. First, because campaigning against an ailing opponent is never a good look or an easy option. Thus, the Biden campaign pulled all of their attack ads, only to then find that the president had no intention of being hors de combat for long. Second, because O'Donnell's brush with his own mortality had the effect of making the president more vulnerable and therefore more human. His rapid recovery means that he now claims to have taken on the virus and overcome it. Thus, the president has found, no doubt inadvertently, yet another way to dominate the political agenda. In the space of a few days, he has gone from generally adjudged loser in the presidential 2020 debate to self-proclaimed victor over COVID-19. Does any of this turn the contest upside down and turn the underdog president into the favourite? Perhaps not. But equally, the many commentators who had all but written him off should reflect on the full impact of this October surprise to end all surprises. But for now, from Alex, myself and all at the show, it's goodbye, stay safe, and we hope to see you all again next week.